Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Gyandut 2.0 program, the initiative taken by the Department of College Education, Rajasthan. Hello, friends, I am Miss Bharti Singh Arya, Assistant Professor in the Department of English from Government College, Jamdoli, Jaipur. And in today's video, I shall discuss with you the features of the Elizabethan age. The Elizabethan era took place from 1558 to 1603, and it is considered by many historians to be the golden period of English literature. The time period is named after Queen Elizabeth I because it was she who ruled during this time. Well, this age is known by many names. The historians have termed it as the Golden Age or the Renaissance. Some even call it the Shakespearean Age, and others call it the first great age of drama and the second great age of poetry. Now, the Golden Age, as the name suggests, is a period when great tasks are accomplished. We see it is the time of peace and prosperity because people all around are happy and engaged in constructive works. The Elizabethan age is remarkable for its religious tolerance, strong national spirit, and patriotism. There was social content and intellectual progress, and unbound enthusiasm could be seen in the people and the public. The masses were also very happy because of the flourishing England. Incredible thoughts, feelings, and vigorous actions were the pillar of this age. It flowers the extraordinary development of drama. Equally, it is also an age of poetry. All in all, we can say that the Elizabethan period is the period of glory and triumph in the life and literature of English people. We can also say that it is the age of this age, the golden age, Elizabethan age, represented the apogee of English Renaissance. The age is most famous for its theatre, as William Shakespeare and many others composed plays and dramas that never existed before because they broke many myths around the creativity and all the styles that were being followed by the earlier people of England, the earlier dramatists and composers. William Shakespeare refuted all the rules and regulations, and he created his own style in theatre. It was an age of extraordinary expansion abroad, an age of exploration. People were going around and they were exploring different countries and new places in the world. While back at home, we get to see the Protestant Reformation. People it started coming to accept the Protestant Reformation. Also, another important event that took place was the defeat of the Spanish Armada, which made England a maritime power. Looking back at the history of the Elizabethan era, looking back uh, about the second half of the 15th century and also the 16th century, we can say that it was a turbulent age. In the 15th century, there was War of Roses. It was a 30 years long war. Excuse me. This 30-year War of Roses was a series of civil wars that took place in England. It exposed the rivalry between two aristocratic houses of York and Lancaster. It ended with the victory of the Lancaster family when the distant cousin Henry Tudor claimed the throne. Finally, the war was resolved when they came to a compromise. He was crowned as Henry VII, who started the Tudor dynasty. The Queen Elizabeth also coincides to be a part of the Tudor dynasty. Throughout the Tudor reign, England constantly fought with its continental neighbors. Now we know that such long wars, when they take place, how it affects common man, how it affects the economy of the country and the peace in the country, in the nation. The old aristocracy lost most of its wealth and power in the War of Roses, which was quite inevitable because such long wars always leave the never ending impacts. So, Henry VIII in the 16th century began giving titles to people from the middle class, making the new aristocracy faithful to the king above all else. The middle class was growing richer and more powerful. We also get to see the rise of a new class, that is the middle class. And since there was peace in the nation, so people also started working hard, and at the same time, they started gaining more and more of the riches and started understanding their own power. The communications revolution started with the printing press. The printing press was another very, very important invention in the Elizabethan era because it resulted in the fact that in the 1600, nearly half of the population had some kind of literacy. People started gaining interest in reading and writing. There was more awareness, and people became aware about themselves and their rights. They had access to education because earlier education was it was for the classes and not the masses. People could not read novels, they could not enjoy reading, but after the invention of the printing press, after people started learning how to read and write, they even started enjoying poetry and the dramas and the plays. We see that the effect of Latin was also becoming less. Latin and Greek are a little complicated languages. They're difficult language for a common man to understand. So people did not have very much interest in Latin, and they did not even know how to read and write in Latin. So we see after the printing press came into existence, after it was invented, we get to see the effect of Latin getting decreased. They were also becoming aware of endless possibilities for wealth and success that lay in trade and the new world. In the 1530s, Henry VIII broke with Rome. So, in the 16th century, we see that there happened three most influential historical developments. They were the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the emergence of England as a maritime power. Now, how the fashion in the Elizabethan era was. The Elizabethan people were very fashionable people. Men wore their hair short, while the women combed their long hair upwards, which was fixed with a wire frame that formed a heart shape. You can see in the picture also. Women liked to color their hair, they liked using fake hair to hide the gray hairs, they liked gaudy colors, they liked wearing beautiful, colorful clothes. They even bleached their hands in white. Fake hair was also very common. Purple clothing was a sign of royalty. During the Elizabethan era, excuse me, men and women wore very high collars fashioned after Spanish couture. Women liked to wear high heels so that they could give their height a good stature. Women also strove to imitate the curly red hair using different recipes for bleaching their hair. Mirrors always popped out from the girdles of men, which showed that people were quite aware of the beauty. Some social habits of the Elizabethan people were, just like I told you earlier, that they wore gaudy dresses, they loved drinking and gambling. They were the people who enjoyed life. They were adventurous by spirit and indulged in dangerous and exciting sports as bear baiting, sword fighting, and the duels. So, because there were sword fighting, duels, and bear baiting kind of games that were very popular during that age, so bloodsheds were also very common, and people also were quite superstitious in nature. Loving another man's wife was also quite a sport common during the Elizabethan period. Some literary features of the Elizabethan era. Now, the first is the popularity of poetry. Though we see that the poetical production was not quite equal to the dramatic one, poetry still enjoyed its heyday during the Elizabethan era. It was nevertheless of great and original beauty. Poetic fervor had bagged the entire age. We see the production of lyrics, songs, and sonnets in huge amount. And that's why England became the nest of singing birds. It was popularly called the nest of singing birds. There were notable improvements in versification. Spenser introduced pictorialism and melody into poetry. Elizabethan poetries were extraordinary because they were fresh, distinct variety, and they were very youthful in nature as well as romantic feeling. It was filled with romance. This age saw the flowering of poetry in its own way. Also, it was an era of sonnets. The sonnet was popularized in this period, though it was introduced by Thomas Wyatt early in the 16th century. Now, he introduced the patriarchal sonnet. Well, we see that Shakespeare also made changes to the Italian model and he introduced his own style. Shakespeare was very imaginative and he had a different and distinct style in whatever he produced. So he introduced his own style into the sonnet, which till date is known as the English sonnet or Shakespearean sonnet. Shakespeare wrote over 100 sonnets that were different from Petrarchan sonnets. Another important literary works was of prose. For the first time in the history of English literature, prose was of first-rate importance because before that there was hardly any appreciable prose written. The heavy burden of the Latin was disappearing just as we saw that Latin being a complex language was not really understandable by the common man. So the burden of Latin was disappearing while English prose gained a tradition and universal application. People started accepting it and started taking interest. Rapid development during this period was obviously inevitable. The emergence of Renaissance. In the Elizabethan era, there were two potent forces, the Renaissance and the Reformation. Both these forces blended and cooperated with each other. These two movements produced a great uplifting of the spirit. Renaissance basically means rebirth, and it is traditionally applied to intellectual movements that embraced the reawakening of scholarship and the self-emancipation of the individual from the thraldom of institutions. The Renaissance inspired the aesthetic and intellectual potential, whereas we see that the Reformation aroused the spiritual nature of people. Then there was this new classicism. By the time of Elizabeth, we see the Renaissance had made its presence strongly felt in England already. There was a revival of the study of Greek, and in all, classical language like Greek and Latin forced themselves upon the branches of literature. But these new classical influences were of great benefit because they polished the earlier sturdiness and roughness of English. The historical situation also encouraged a rich and healthy production of literature of all kinds. There was a lot of output, abundant output of literature in the period. Pamphlets and treatises were freely written, and literary discussions slowly grew in importance and frequency. People started showing a lot of interest in literary subjects. A lot of literary discussions were being made, and people were enjoying this abundance of output of literary productions. the new romanticism, the romantics' desires of the remote, the wonderful and the beautiful were nurtured during this Elizabethan era. It can also be called as the first and the greatest romantic period. On the other hand, we see that there was a rejection of the old and the past in general, which was termed too rigid for an adventurous age. And that's why we see a lot of experiments being made by Shakespeare and other composers and writers. Also, there was a daring and resolute spirit of adventure in literary as well as other regions. In other fields, also, we see a lot of daring and resolute spirit of adventure. The development of the drama. Drama during the Elizabethan age made a rapid and glorious leap into maturity. The drama was perfectly molded in the hands of Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, who perfectly developed it, which is known for its newness till today. Although it had many early difficulties also, which they had to overcome, because there were a lot of disturbances which was caused by the actors. The theatres were also closed between 1590 to 1593, but finally in 1594 we see that the problems of the theatres was resolved as they licensed the two troupes of the players, the Lord of Chamberlains, among whom was Shakespeare also, and the Lord of Admirals. Excuse me. Another early difficulty which the drama had to face was its fondness for taking part in the quarrels, because there were a lot of quarrels that were happening on the stage. We also see the most important anti-dramatic book of that time, which was Gosson's School of Abuse, to which Sidney replied with his apology for poetry. Another important feature of the time is the translations that took place in that age. The Elizabethan age observed several important foreign books translations in the English language. By 1579, many of the great books of ancient and modern times had been translated into English, almost all of them by 1603, which was the end of Queen's reign. For example, the original books, the translations also gained popularity, like Plutarch's Lives, translated by Sir Thomas North. Montaigne's essays were translated by John Florio. Arthur Golding translated Metamorphoses. We also see that Sir John Harrington translated Aristotle's Orlando Furioso. Richard Carew translated Tasso's Jerusalem Libertad. And then another important feature is the spirit of independence. Even though the writers borrowed literature from abroad, this age depicted an unbound spirit of independence and creativeness. Very good example is of Shakespeare. who openly borrowed literature, but with his splendid creative imaginations, he transformed everything into gold. Whatever went into his hands, into his thoughts, turned into gold. Spenserian stanza was introduced by Spenser, and we gain the impression of creativity and boldness from his works. And we can say that inventiveness and was also the masterstroke of the time. The writer's outlook was broad and independent. So these were the literary features of the Elizabethan era. Thank you. That's all from my side.